Well, good morning. My name is Mandy Fowler. I'm the Director of Faith Development on staff here at Cornerstone. For those of you I haven't had a chance to meet yet, and it's so good to be with you, whether you're here in the room or watching online. It's great to be together this morning. Quick show of hands, how many of us, when we think of vacation, think of being near the water? Yeah, I'd say most of us, a lot of us. Maybe it's because we're surrounded by lakes and streams and all kinds of water here in Michigan. Whether you have a cottage or you don't, maybe you're only able to make it out to the lake one Saturday this summer, you're running out of time. When we think of time off of work, many of us automatically think water. It's such a source of fun, it's beautiful, it's relaxing, it gives us a sense of peace, because water is refreshing. And Jesus agrees with us, I think. In the gospel accounts, we find him many times in, near, literally on the Sea of Galilee. It's a beautiful freshwater lake. I got to stay there overnight when I went to Israel several years back, and I remember thinking, gosh, I get it now. This is why Jesus spent so much time here. It's just beautiful. It's peaceful. Even God likes spending time at the water. Maybe your summer's been too busy and too hectic. You haven't gotten a chance to get away. Maybe you need a little help to feel refreshed this morning. This is for you.
There's a key above the door at the cottage, and if you wonder what it's there for you to come and stay with me, spend a day, maybe two. I would love to spend some time with you. Use the key above the door at the cottage, and there's a lamp next to the chair at the cottage, and if you wonder why it's there for you. It's there to light the room. So take a seat, put up your feet, read a book, maybe a magazine. Use the lamp next to the chair at the cottage. Time with me under the shade of a maple tree, sipping on raspberry tea. Oh, won't you come and rest with me? And there's a porch, it has a swing at the cottage, and if you wonder what you can bring, just come along. Oh, you don't need a thing, just come take time, come ease your mind, come as you are, and leave your cares behind. Come up the porch and sit on the swing at the cottage. Oh, won't you come spend time with me, running our toes through the sand on a beach, sit on the dock and dangle our feet. Oh, won't you come and rest with me? Rest with me. There's a key above the door at the cottage.
Well, those are some familiar faces for us. That was our director of worship, Rachel Lenger, and her dad, Scott. And Scott actually wrote that song, and they recorded it at their cottage by the lake. We're so thankful for their family. So we're in the middle of a series called There's Something in the Water, and we're looking at stories from Scripture that involve water in some way and pulling some spiritual lessons from those. And if we can all agree that we have a longing to be by the water, to chase that feeling of peace and relaxation, the getaway, I want to go even farther and think about this morning what it means to really rest in the way that God has asked us to rest in Scripture, because he does. In Psalm 23, King David gives us some incredible imagery of God as a shepherd, and I'd like for us to read these first 3 verses of that psalm together out loud. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. This is such a beautiful picture of what it looks like to rest with God and in God, by the still waters, by the quiet waters, and it's refreshing to the soul, David writes. So I need to ask you, do you know how to rest? And I don't mean vacation. I think most of us, we know how to vacation, right? I mean really rest. So today we're going to look at what God says about rest in Scripture, starting with the one of the 10 commandments that we like to pretend is not in there, which instructs us to preserve one day a week to a Sabbath dedicated to the Lord, where we don't work. And Sabbath simply means to cease work, to rest. And just to refresh your memory of this commandment, or maybe introduce it to you for the first time, it doesn't just say keep a Sabbath and move on. It's a long, detailed commandment. Let's take a look at it. Exodus 20:8-11 says this: Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. 2 quick observations about the 10 commandments. First, this one and the one about not worshiping idols are by far the longest of the 10, with the most words used. I think it's just worth observing what God thought we needed a little more explanation on, or maybe a little more convincing of. And then it's interesting because the other commandments don't contain justifications for themselves. It doesn't say, don't murder because, don't lie because, don't steal because, but this one has a justification in it. There's a reason given, because God rested. And that's a callback to the first few pages of the Bible in the creation account, where after God makes all things, he takes a step back and looks at it and says, that's good. And then he rests. Why? Is God tired? God just a little pooped out, he needs a nap? We aren't told why there, but I think it becomes clear elsewhere. We get a hint at that answer, so hold that thought. We'll come back to that. But I have to ask us a challenging question. Why do you think that we uphold the other commandments without any problems, really, but think of this one as optional? We don't have the same attitude toward the others. We don't think, don't murder, don't steal, don't cheat on your spouse. Okay, I'm with you, tracking. Don't lie, don't make idols, sounds good. Keep one day a week as a Sabbath. Ooh. Have you seen that gif of Homer Simpson fading back into the bushes? That's what I feel like doing when I hear that. I want to back away. Why does this feel like too much to ask? I think a major reason for us is cultural. A Sabbath feels like a throwback to a quaint, old-timey day, horse and buggy times, or it conjures up a time not that long ago for many of us. Many of us who are old enough can remember a time when nothing was open on Sundays. We physically couldn't do anything. It sounds like something that was a good idea in the past, but now we're just kind of past that. It's not really practical. There's just simply too much to do. But that's not true in every culture. There are whole cultures where they work a siesta, a break, into every day, or they really preserve a day where nothing's open. So I think we have a responsibility to ask ourselves, What is it that makes the idea of totally resting from work for a day seem impossible or impractical? And then the follow-up question is, and what do we do about it? What do we do about it? I would love for you to think about this with your family, your friends, your life group sometime this week. Get into a conversation about this. It's an open-ended question. See what you come up with. What do we do about this? One reason it feels optional to us is that we Americans have a tiny obsession with productivity. In the 1960s, a Senate committee predicted that the American work week by the year 2000 would just be 14 hours a week. Way off. If you remember the cartoon TV show The Jetsons, so that's set in 2062, so we still have 40 years to go before we hit that time. But not only are we nowhere near having the flying car kind of situation that they have, but we're also nowhere near the work week that they have in that future, which is 9 hours a week. The vision for the future was that technological advancements would make it possible for us to work less, or maybe not need to work quite so hard. But instead, I think the opposite has happened. All of our technological advancements have made it possible for us to work more. We can check and reply to email in the middle of a worship service, in the middle of sleeping, in the middle of playing with our kids in the park. We can take a meeting anywhere, whether we're on vacation or sick. We can literally be doing something productive every waking minute of every day if we wanted to. What an accomplishment. But is constant productivity and nonstop work what God is asking of us? Well, the answer is no. Let's close in prayer. No, I'm just kidding. We need some help in this area. We need some help. So we're going to take a closer look at this commandment to take a Sabbath. I hope we can transform how you read this commandment. For me, I just sort of glazed over, kind of read the 10 Commandments. I know these. I want you to understand it's not that God is giving us something to do just to please him. And it's not meant to be something that we just check off our list to be good Christians. In the words of Jesus, Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. So I want you to see how this commandment to rest reveals so much of the character of God, and it reveals the love and the care that he had for the first people that heard that commandment. And then that love and care extends to us thousands of years later, and we need it just as badly. So let's talk about that first audience that heard this commandment. If you've read the stories of the Old Testament before, you know that the Israelites, the people of God, had been enslaved in Egypt for a long time by the pharaohs, the Egyptian kings. And the book of Exodus gets into how God hears the cries of the Israelites, and he uses Moses to lead them out of slavery, out of Egypt. It's a big adventurous story. But just before Moses starts on that adventure, things have gotten really bad for the Israelites. Let's set that scene with what they're experiencing in Exodus 1. It says, so they put slave masters over them, the Israelites, to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. So they are being worked harshly, making bricks, building with bricks, working the fields. Their lives are bitter, it says, because of the hard work. Now, when Moses and his brother Aaron come before Pharaoh the first time, this is what happens. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness. Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. Then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Now let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues or with the sword. But the king of Egypt said, Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to your work. Then Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are now numerous, and you have stopped them from working. That same day, Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and overseers in charge of the people. You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw. but require them to make the same number of bricks before. Don't reduce the quota. They're lazy. That is why they're crying out, let us go and sacrifice to our God. Make the work harder for the people so that they keep working and pay no attention to lies. So not only does Pharaoh not want to let them go and worship God, he makes their terrible situation worse by making them go now and gather the straw that they needed to make bricks. And they better not make one less brick than they're expected to, even though their workload is doubled. And notice that he says, they're just crying out and asking to go worship God because they're lazy. That's an interesting tactic. It's meant to discourage them from complaining or asking for anything more because he just made their work twice as hard. But calling them lazy, it's a subtle tactic that we've seen across history and today, even in subtle ways. I'm not overworking you, you just don't want to work hard. Today that might sound like, we understand you already put in 60, 70 hours this week, but the rest of the team's coming in on Sunday. Unspoken line there is, you just don't want to work as hard as everybody else? Are you lazy? Pharaoh is saying to these people, your labor, your body, your work, your life belong to me, and don't forget that for a second. Your life only has value because of the work you do. Your life has no other value. Well, the predictable happens. The people are not able to meet their quotas, and this is what Pharaoh says again. Lazy, that's what you are, lazy. That is why you keep saying, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Now get to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce your full quota of bricks. So Pharaoh's asking more than is humanly possible of the Israelites, all in the name of work. Produce, produce, produce. And he continues to call them lazy. He's really dehumanized them. They're not individuals with hopes and dreams and families. They are only working bodies. They are only brick-making machines. They're only worth what they can produce, and if they can't constantly produce, they're lazy. In our Know Your Enemy series that we just wrapped up before this one, we learned about being able to recognize the strategies of the enemy wherever they are, and sometimes they're a little more subtle. Can you see the efforts of the enemy and how Pharaoh is treating the Israelites? We contrast that with the words of Jesus, who said, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Can you hear the stealing and killing and destruction in the way of Pharaoh? Now let's set God's concept of Sabbath against this backdrop, because the people who experienced all of this are the same people who are the first audience of that commandment, of all the commandments, after God, through Moses, gets them out of slavery and out of Egypt. Think about how much more meaning that commandment takes on when you think about who that first audience was. Born into slavery, worked ruthlessly, without concern for their bodies or their lives. All that matters about you is that you can produce. They're steeped in the way of Pharaoh, which says to the Israelites, the entire priority and the measure of your life is work. Your identity is your work. I'm your master. Your whole purpose is to work for me. And that little tag, you're lazy to want time off to go worship God. That's what they were used to. That's all they knew. Let's contrast that with the way of God, the God of abundant life, the God who rests, who modeled rest for us after that job well done making all things. And I do think that was why God rested, not because he's a little tuckered out, but because he's modeling it for his children, for us, for humans. It's not just an arbitrary rule that he hands down, do this to please me. It's a commandment of love. And he makes it a point to tell these people who've been stuck in this system of nonstop work to set aside a day each week not to work. To make it a rest unto the Lord, it says. To make rest from work an act of worship. I want to say that again because I think we need to hear it. God made rest from work an act of worship. This is a day each week that's meant to be a gift to us, a delight and a joy for us and for God. It's meant to be a blessing. Let's look at the commandment again and think about it through the eyes of the Israelites. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. Can you imagine what a gift it must have felt like to hear that if you were among that first crowd? And yet how foreign it would be because they were so used to working 24/7, making bricks. Work had been their whole lives, and they'd been told not working is lazy. That was all they were used to. And notice also God's concern is for all people. You, your kids, your servants, male and female, your animals, the immigrants, all get a Sabbath. You're responsible for your family and your employees and the marginalized in your community not getting overworked. Even the animals. To paraphrase Oprah, you get a Sabbath, and you get a Sabbath, and you get a Sabbath, and you get a Sabbath. Everybody gets a Sabbath. This is what's best for all of creation, for everyone and everything. And in giving this commandment, God is really setting work in its proper place. Work is good. Work has its place the rest of the week. Even in Eden, Adam and Eve are tasked with tending and caring for the garden. God is not saying that work is bad. But in crafting this rhythm of life for the Israelites, God is intentionally counteracting the way of Pharaoh. Work is good, but your identity isn't your work. Work is good, but your purpose in life is not to make bricks. Work is good, but your reason for existing is not to labor. Your existence doesn't depend on what you can produce. So God is giving humans a day each week to remember who is on the throne over our lives and showing us what kind of king God is, the king who asks you to rest each week and calls it holy. I think we see so much of God's character in those 4 verses of that commandment, especially in contrast with Pharaoh, these 2 kings. So I said at the beginning, I thought that God's care and love for that first crowd, those first Israelites who really needed this, really needed to hear this commandment, really needed a different way to experience life. I think that same love and care extends to us thousands of years later because we also need this. Why? Well, can we see the way that the way of Pharaoh is alive and well today? We have modern slavery in places in the world, which is wickedness that we need to take care of and do everything we can to free people who are experiencing that. But then we also have more subtle ways as well in our culture. We aren't in bondage to an Egyptian king. Many of us are not clocking in every day to make bricks, but we need to take a moment to ask ourselves some challenging questions. Have I made productivity the measure of my life? I've discovered this is a big issue for me when I realized I felt guilty if I just watched a TV show and did nothing else. I have to be doing research or answering an email or shopping for something I need online. Otherwise it's wasted time. I realized I have an issue with productivity, making sure every moment is productive. Another question, do I feel lazy if I'm not working, or do I feel like I have nothing to show for myself if I take a day off of all work? Is my work my identity? If we can answer yes to any of these questions, we just might have let the way of Pharaoh slip in when it comes to work. And don't feel bad about it. Make more bricks is kind of the system that we live in. It's mostly unspoken. We have a lot of pressure and expectations when it comes to work, and that includes paid and unpaid work. Just think of how much time we spend making our yards and homes look a certain way, meet a certain standard of what other people think or what other people have, or even just a mental standard that we have. Or the pressures of making sure that kids have all the lessons and all the sports and everything they need so that they and we, if we're being honest, can measure up. It's all work. It's work that feels like it will never end. Busy is the standard answer we're expected to give when someone asks us how we're doing it. If we can't answer busy, we might feel a little bit ashamed. I'm not busy, and I'm not busy enough. And wow, is this woven into our identities? I've had the experience of losing a job, of not working for a time, and that can really mess with your identity, especially in a culture where usually our first question to someone when we meet them is, what do you do? If you don't have an answer to that, that's a struggle, right? And that's because we live in a time and place that leans toward the way of Pharaoh. If you can't work, what are you worth? If your job's been eliminated, what use are you? If you retired from a job you loved and found so much purpose in, who are you now? I know somebody who had to retire a little bit early, and he's realizing he doesn't have anything else. He's an avid sports watcher, but there's not that much purpose in that. He's finding himself kind of adrift without his job and wondering what his life's about, who he is apart from his work. I think many of us would echo that experience. Living where and when we do, we need Sabbath. We need it. So we can be reminded every single week we are made in the image of God. And that's what gives us infinite worth. It has nothing to do with how many bricks we can make, how much we can produce. So as we close, let's get practical. Sabbath is something we can get very legalistic about. Living here in West Michigan, I've heard some stories about people's experience with that growing up. I know people who growing up on Sabbath weren't allowed to do anything fun, which we just read that commandment twice. There wasn't a word in there about not doing anything fun, was there? But that does sound like someone else in the Bible. We see in the gospel accounts that the Pharisees, the religious leaders, get really upset with Jesus because he was healing people on the Sabbath, because he and his disciples plucked some grains of wheat to eat on the Sabbath. They got really upset, said he was desecrating the Sabbath. And in response, Jesus says the sentence I quoted earlier from Mark 2:27, the Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. It's not something for us to get legalistic about. That's what the Pharisees did, and Jesus rebuked them. It's meant to be a gift. It's meant to remind us that the world doesn't need us to keep spinning. That's on God's shoulders. It's meant to remind us that our work is not our identity, and we can just be and be loved by God. Just by being. God loves us no matter what we're doing. And it's meant to remind us that we are much, much more than brick-making machines. Restores our humanity. So if you're not already doing this, I challenge you to try a rest in the way of a Sabbath, an intentional, holy rest that brings delight and joy and restores your soul. Take baby steps. Everybody's going to have a different experience with this, your different limitations. Maybe you're working 2 jobs, you've got a lot going on. Try a couple hours, honestly. Pick a time. Do not look at your work email. Set aside a day or a half day where you rest, even from the nonstop chores of life. I promise you the lawn will be there tomorrow, the laundry's there tomorrow, the dishes are there tomorrow. And that feels unproductive, I gotta tell you. This is one of the biggest challenges of trying to do this. Now, Sabbath doesn't mean sit in a corner and read a Bible for 8 hours, unless that's what brings you joy. But it also doesn't mean sit on a couch and watch Netflix for 8 hours. It doesn't mean turning our brains off and vegging out. What's life-giving? What reminds you of God's goodness and love? Is it a hike out in nature? Laying in a hammock and listening to some worship music, running through the sprinkler with your kid, your grandkids, the neighbor's kids? Playing an instrument, going to a museum for a while with your family or by yourself, calling an old friend to catch up, preparing a meal for your friends to gather and enjoy, sitting by the quiet water, letting God restore your soul. Maybe you're burnt out and exhausted, and it might look like a nap, truly. This is countercultural. But accepting this gift of Sabbath and receiving it as a gift and not an item on our to-do list, not a burden, means truly disconnecting from work, from chores, from the nonstop labor of our lives. One day, ideally, one day each week. I challenge you to try it. See what happens when we just stop striving. We just let ourselves be present with God in the way that God has asked of us, in the way that God has gifted us. I think you'll be surprised how something that is so impractical and unproductive can be so life-giving and so refreshing. The exact opposite of the legalistic day of no fun you may have grown up with. A gift. We're going to show you a brief video of some water, and I want to use it as an opportunity, just a small mini Sabbath, to rest and just be in the presence of God. You can close your eyes if you want and just listen. And when it's over, I'll lead us in prayer. God, we thank you for the gift of Sabbath. We thank you for the gift of water and the way that it refreshes us. I pray that each time in what's left of the summer that we're anywhere near water, I pray that it is a reminder of how you will restore our souls if we seek to be with you, rest in you. We need a lot of help with this, God, Lord. We have so many priorities, so many things on our to-do list, and this feels impractical, it feels unproductive, it feels inefficient, Lord. Will you take that feeling away from us, Lord? Will you remind us that this is a gift, that this is something that you designed us for? I pray that you would just give us the courage to just try it if we're not already practicing this, Lord, to see how you meet us in it, Lord. And the to-do list can just wait till tomorrow. The world won't stop spinning. But I pray we would find ways that refresh us, ways that bring us joy, things that we can do to remind us that we are not brick-making machines, that our identity is not in our work, our identity is in you. And I pray for moments each day when we can just rest, we can be present in you, Lord, whether that's with our first sip of coffee in the morning, whether that's at our desks at work, doing laundry in the middle of the day, whether that's putting kids to bed, or now in this worship service as the band sings Psalm 23 over us, Lord. May we find rest.